Hey, coming to you from the temporary studio here, and I want to talk about one of the most important parts of any dynamic kettlebell movement, the hike. So for context, the hike is when you set up and you initiate, a single arm swing or a clean or going overhead, doing a snatch or anything like that. And for context here too, when I first start teaching people how to do the very first, most basic dynamic kettlebell movement, which is the kettlebell swing, I actually like to start by teaching people from the top down. So I teach them to hinge the hips back and then pop their hips, because they need to learn the rhythm of being patient, letting the arms come into the body, moving the hips back, reaching the bell back through their legs, and then popping the hips. And just getting that rhythm is the first and most important thing. So I do start off teaching people from the top, which is actually a departure from the way I was teaching this, 10, even 5 years ago. But once you get the rhythm, you need to starting from the ground with an efficient hike that sets up your power and sets you up for having a good backswing and a braced core. So what does that mean? So first things first, whether we're setting up with a single bell or a double bell, you always want to start one long foot distance behind the bell and always start like that. That's just the movement. It's a little three-step. It's 1, 2, 3. All right? So then from here, we want to push the hips back, loading the hamstrings into what is otherwise like a hip hinge or deadlift position. So the shins are relatively vertical so that the knees are over the ankles. The hips are a little bit higher than the knees, and the shoulders are a little bit higher than the hips. And you have a nice, long, straight, extended spine, braced core. Don't want to see a rounded back, a tucked tail, or knees that are coming forward, okay? So you want to be in a real strong position here, like I am right now. Now, in this case, I'm going to do a one-hand bell movement, all right? So from here, I'm bracing my core. Now, when I hike, I want to throw the bell back through my legs, boom. But when I do that, my body doesn't move. I don't stand up, all right? I don't round my back when I throw between my legs. I stay in this position, and I just throw the bell deep back through my legs, boom, to help load my hips. So when I throw that bell back through, you should have your entire wrist, hand, and bell back behind the back of your hamstrings, okay? And then from here, you're beginning the drive phase. You've now loaded your hips and hamstrings, so now you're gonna drive your hips forward into extension and pop that tail, tuck the tail, pop the hips forward, and now we're into our dynamic kettlebell technique, whether that's a swing, clean, snatch, whatever it is you're doing, all right? So the mistakes that I see, the most common ones I just touched on, the first one is that when people hike, they stand. And so now they really don't have much help, much power coming from the hips here. They're gonna have to, at that point, try to load or try to develop strength from their lower back and even try to lift with their upper body. So we don't want that, okay? Now, could you potentially be completing the movement with a shorter backswing? Yes, but that's not the purpose of why we're doing this. We're doing this to move at a full range of motion and to load the hamstrings and glutes, okay? So I want to emphasize hips all the way back, all right? In a perfect world, your spine would get almost parallel to the ground on every backswing you do on a swing, a clean, or a snatch, all right? Let that sink in, that's very important, all right? So the other thing that I see a lot of people do when they're setting up is they start from the ground, they do the little measurement piece that I taught you, but then they just stand and then start trying to move their hips like they're doing a remedial kettlebell exercise. And if the weight's heavy enough, it's gonna be hard to generate enough power to, do a clean or do a snatch without having to use more lower back than what you're really trying to do, or more upper body than what you're really trying to do. So just to recap here with good technique, what we want to do, we get that 1 foot distance because that sets up the length that we need to load this properly. Number 2, get into a strong position. Load the hamstrings and glutes. These are the strong muscles. Lean the bell toward you so that you can pull it and then complete a hike that you hike, boom, throw it all the way back where the upper arm hits the rib cage and the wrist, hand, and bell are all the way behind your hamstrings. Then from here, drive up into your first rep, boom. Okay, don't do these little weenie, okay, now let me try to get my momentum, like that's weenie stuff, don't do that. Go straight through the legs, pop the hips, and we're into our technique, whether it be a swing, a clean, or a snatch. If we're talking double bells, it's the exact same thing. Just make sure that you set your bells up in a V as far as the handles. And this, because you're now using a heavier weight, is where the hike is even more important. Okay, this is where we need even more power from the hamstrings and hips through that hip hinge. So we need to be even better with our hike work. Or watch my deep backswing here. If I'm doing that, I'm getting the full power from my legs and glutes, and now it's actually easier to do all the hand techniques. So these are some things to consider when you're doing dynamic kettlebell work. The setup is very important, so be mindful of just getting that good hike and setting yourself up for success in your techniques.